The clatter of chains, the sharp crack of a whip, then silence. Under the scorching Texas sun, a barefoot young girl stood on a wooden platform, her wrists bound with rusted iron. The crowd watched her like cattle at market, measuring her worth with cold eyes. The auctioneer's grin was slick with sweat. Even 4 years after the Civil War's end, the trade of human souls still breathed in hidden barns. Outlaw auctions where desperation wore a price tag. Next one. 17. No husband. No kin. Been sold 3 times. Don't talk, don't work. $5 to start. No one spoke. In a land where strong backs fetched the highest bids, a silent girl had no value. The war had broken more than bones, it had hollowed spirits. A man near the front spat into the dirt. Ain't worth a dime. Her name was Lena Cartwright. Her dress hung in shreds, dust caked on her skin. Hair clung to her face, half hiding the bruise on her cheek. She stared at the ground, still as stone. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Then came a voice, calm, deep, steady. I'll pay 20. Heads turned. At the back stood a man in a faded brown coat, gray stubble across his jaw. Grant McCade, 56, a man who hadn't smiled in a decade. The auctioneer blinked. $20? You sure? Grant nodded once. The gavel struck wood. Sold. Lena didn't move, didn't even lift her gaze. Grant stepped forward, hat in hand. When he saw her face clearly, his chest tightened. That small crescent scar on her wrist, he remembered binding that wound 8 years ago. The frightened child who'd asked if it would leave a mark. He'd told her no. He'd lied. The auctioneer shoved her forward. She stumbled. Grant caught her before she hit the floor. Her skin burned with fever. When she finally looked up, her eyes, green, hollow, and far away, met his. Lena, he whispered. Her expression didn't shift. A flicker passed through her eyes, like a memory buried too deep to reach. She pushed it down. People like her had learned not to trust familiar faces. Maybe she didn't remember him. Or maybe she did and wished she didn't. Outside, the wind carried the echo of the gavel. Another soul sold, another debt paid. Grant handed over his last coins and led her out. She walked a few steps behind him, the soft clink of her chains haunting the dusty road. He didn't know if she'd ever understand why he did this, maybe she never would. But as the barn doors creaked shut behind them, he could feel the past breathing down his neck. 8 years ago, his father's greed had destroyed the Cartwright family. Now the last piece of that family walked beside him, silent, scarred, alive. The sun dipped lower, throwing long shadows across the road. Grant knew the ghosts of that day would follow him until the truth was spoken. But how does a man ask forgiveness from someone who doesn't even know who he is? The dirt road stretched beneath their horses' hooves. Dust rose like ghosts behind them. Not long after they left the barn, Grant halted, pulled a key from his pocket, and unlocked her chains. No one should wear these in a free country, he muttered, remembering the union's promises that never reached people like her. The heat pressed down, splitting the earth. Grant rode slowly. Lena followed on a smaller mare, silent and bowed. The faint clink of the chain still fastened to her wrist was the only sound between them. He could feel her fear radiate like heat. Each time he looked back, she stared at the ground, refusing to meet his eyes. They stopped beneath a massive oak, the only patch of shade for miles. Grant dismounted, tied the reins, and pulled a small canteen from his saddlebag. "Here," he said gently. She hesitated, watching him as if expecting a blow. Then, with trembling fingers, she took the canteen. Her eyes narrowed, measuring him like she'd done to countless men who offered kindness before cruelty. She drank a small sip, wiped her lips, and looked up at him. Her voice was quiet but sharp as broken glass. "Guess you got what you paid for," she said. "Do what you want." Grant froze. The words cut deeper than a knife. Slowly he knelt, showing empty hands. "I didn't buy you to own you," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to see them sell you again." A bitter laugh slipped from her, dry and hollow. "You think that makes it better?" He had no answer. None that would sound right. They sat in the heat, silent, stretching like a wound that wouldn't close. Grant stared at his boots, dust thick on his fingers. "I knew your family," he finally said. "Your father was a good man. I should have done more when they came for him." Lena turned away, her voice flat as dry earth. "Everybody says that after it's too late." The wind stirred the branches above them. She rose, canteen still in hand, and walked toward her horse. Grant didn't stop her. He just watched. knowing he'd earned every ounce of her anger. He replaced his hat, climbed onto his horse, and followed at a distance. The sound of hooves echoed through the hills, steady, hollow, like a tired heartbeat trying to find its rhythm again. He wondered how many miles it would take before she stopped seeing him as the enemy, or if she ever would. And in that silence, one thought burned bright as fire. What would she do when she finally learned the truth? By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was falling behind the ridges. The land spread quiet and lonely, even the wind seemed weary. Grant untied the horses, handed Lena a piece of bread, and gestured toward a small cabin. "Inside," he said softly. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the single bed, the cold stove. Then she stepped inside, slow and wary, like a stray testing the floor. For days, the ranch stayed silent. Lena worked without a word, feeding horses, hauling water, scrubbing floors till her hands bled. Grant mended fences and roofs, careful not to watch her too long. They lived like two ghosts bound by unfinished sins. But silence in the west never lasted long. On the third day, 3 riders appeared on the road. Dust trailed behind them, sunlight glinting off a badge. Sheriff Dalton. Once a man of justice, now a snake in lawman's clothes. The same one who'd led the soldiers that burned the Cartwright farm. Dalton dismounted, slow and smug. Well, if it ain't Grant McCade. His eyes slid past Grant to the girl by the fence. He squinted at the scar on her wrist, recognition flashing before the smirk returned. "Now that's a face I thought I'd never see again." Lena froze, fingers clutching the wooden rail. Grant stepped forward, blocking Dalton's view. "You've had your look," he said evenly. Dalton chuckled darkly. "You buying lost girls now, Grant? Or is she here to keep your bed warm?" Grant didn't flinch, but the air thickened. That kind of quiet that comes right before a gunshot. "I paid for her freedom," Grant said. "Not her body." Dalton's hand hovered near his holster. "That's mighty noble. But I remember that name, Cartwright. Her daddy was a traitor." The same lie he'd once used to steal the Cartwright land, twisting truth into excuse. Lena's breath caught. Her mind flashed to fire, screams, and the smell of smoke. She wanted to spit the truth at him, but silence had kept her alive this long. Grant's jaw clenched. "She's under my protection." Dalton smirked, pulled a single bullet from his pocket, and placed it on the fence post. "A reminder, Grant," he said softly. "Some ghosts don't stay buried." When they rode off, the dust hung heavy as sin. Lena picked up the bullet, turned it in her hand. "Who was that?" she asked quietly. Grant didn't answer. Not yet. He just stared into the setting sun, the memory of fire still alive in his mind. Because he knew this wasn't over, and when Dalton came back, blood would follow. That night the wind howled harder than usual, the kind that carried the smell of rain and memories too old to bury. Grant sat beside a small fire, its light flickering against the rough cabin walls. Across from him, Lena sat in silence, her face half hidden by shadow. Neither spoke, but silence in a place like that had a way of forcing truth to surface. After a long while, Lena reached into her pocket and placed something on the table, a small silver pocket watch, worn smooth with time. The initials R. C were faintly carved on its back. She slid it toward him. "Recognize it?" she asked, her voice steady but brittle. Grant's hand froze. He did. Robert Cartwright, her father. "I found it in a bag left behind after the raid," she said quietly. "I kept it 8 years, through every place they sent me. Never let anyone touch it. It was the last thing Pa gave me before the soldiers came. He said, 'Keep this safe, Lena.'" Her eyes glistened in the firelight, not from weakness, but from the weight of remembering. "You knew him, didn't you?" Grant swallowed hard, voice rough. "I did." "Then tell me the truth," she said, leaning forward. "What really happened that night?" The flames cracked and twisted, shadows bending on the walls. Grant's voice came low, each word heavy as iron. "My father sold your family out. He wanted your land. Told the soldiers you were Confederate sympathizers. I heard him talking that night, rode to warn your pa, but by the time I got there, everything was burning. I was a coward. I lived, and they didn't." Lena's hand trembled around the watch. Her jaw clenched like she wanted to throw it into the fire, to make it all disappear. But she couldn't. It was all she had left of the people the war had stolen. "You think telling me this makes it better?" she whispered. Grant shook his head. "No, it don't. But you deserve to know who you're standing beside." They sat there, the fire snapping between them, thunder rolling across the far hills like the earth remembering its sins. After a long silence, Lena spoke again, voice softer, almost questioning. "If your father did all that, why are you the one carrying the guilt?" Grant looked up, his eyes old and tired. "Because I was there, because I did nothing, and because I'm still breathing when they're not." The fire hissed, a single spark rising and vanishing into the dark. Lena watched him quietly, something inside her shifting. Her anger didn't vanish, but it cracked, just enough for something else to slip through. Maybe understanding, maybe pity, maybe both. Then outside, a sound shattered the stillness, the pounding of hooves. Fast, close. Grant grabbed his gun and moved to the door. Rain lashed the windows as he listened. The hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the fire's faint crackle and the storm's breath. He stood there a long while, gun still in hand, eyes fixed on the rain. Behind him, Lena sat by the hearth, the silver watch clutched in her palm. Neither spoke, but the silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore, only heavy, full of everything that had been said. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sky stretched wide and washed clean. Grant went out to mend a broken fence, his back sore from years of work and regret. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "You're doing it wrong," she said. He turned. Lena stood there, hair tangled, dress still damp from the rain, holding a hammer in one hand. Grant blinked, then smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. Without another word, she came closer and started helping him. They worked side by side, silent except for the sound of wood and wind, and in that simple rhythm, something quiet began to change. Not love, not yet, but something close to peace. That night, when the chores were done, Grant sat carving wood by lamplight. He shaped 2 small crosses, rough but careful. One he marked Robert Cartwright, the other just family. When Lena saw them the next morning, her breath caught. Tears gathered in her eyes, tears that had been waiting 8 long years to fall. She knelt beside the graves Grant had built near the fence line, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. Then she stood, walked to him, and pressed the silver watch into his palm. "I think it's time you keep it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, it belongs to them." A small smile touched her lips, fragile, but real. "Then let it stay here." That night she didn't sleep curled up by the door. Instead, she sat near the window, watching the stars. Grant across the room finally felt like he could breathe again. Days turned into weeks. Lena stayed. She sewed torn clothes, planted seeds, handed him a plank when he stumbled in the mud. Little things, small mercies that felt like rebuilding. Slowly, the ghosts on that land began to fade. Maybe forgiveness doesn't arrive in one grand moment. Maybe it grows, the way grass pushes through burned soil, quiet and slow. And maybe that's what healing really is. If you've ever carried guilt too heavy to name, what would it take for you to forgive yourself? And if someone once broke you, could you ever let them make it right? Take a deep breath. Pour yourself a cup of tea. Think about that. And if this story stirred something in you, tap the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. Because sometimes, even in the wildest lands, folks still find their way home.